Thanks, Sadie. I think the one thing that really makes this festival stand out is its intimate nature, and both in how to get to these venues, and you can actually see a lot of film. You also see a lot of filmmakers. It always strikes me every year when I look at the program, and you see afterwards Q&A with filmmaker, and the high percentage of filmmakers that get to this festival and get here because every time it's a great experience for them. How many are filmmakers in the audience, by the way? We'll do a little. How many are New Day filmmakers? Okay, good. We may call on you later. So it is my, Sadie asked me, and of course, a little bit of my history. I was a film curator I've been doing working films for about 11 years, going on 12, surprisingly. Before that, for 15 years, I was a film curator, actually at the Mint Museum in Charlotte, in North Carolina. At that point, there were two film curators in North Carolina, in the South. There was one at the High Museum, and there was me. But it was my pleasure to actually meet Julia. Came and was a juror for me way back in, I think, 1990 or 89 or somewhere. Anyway, of course, and I was programming a lot of New Day work at the time, and that collection of film really fit in well with the kind of programming I wanted to do. So today we're going to have this conversation. This is not meant to be nostalgic. It is, it is a 40-year-old success story, but it is 40 years old because it's a success story and still remains so. And we want to hear from them a little bit about how it started, but what kept it going and why is it still a success story? I mean, I was telling these guys, when I was a curator and still in my working with a lot of filmmakers in the US, ephemeral and non-scientific survey of when I say to filmmakers, what's your second job? And they'll say, I don't really have a second job. I'm still living off my, those films I made back in the 80s and the 90s. And more often than not, they're New Day filmmakers, which I think is really a testament to the model they put together and the flexibility they built into that. I've been making a pitch for this conversation during the festival in the elevator and everywhere else, and I'll say, these guys are socialist / capitalist, which is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing, actually. They can talk a little bit about that as well. So it's Liane Brennan. So just raise your hand. Hey, Julia Reichert here, Jim Klein. We know who Jim is, right? And Amelia Rothschild. Amalie, sorry. Yes, of course. And how many people were at this screening last night? Did we ask you that? No. You should see these films. They're still in the collective. They're going to be at Duke. The archivist from Duke is here. So anyway, these films are extraordinary. We watched the 4 films that founded the cooperative from 1971, most of them yesterday afternoon, and they are incredibly current and resonant. So basically, I want to talk to you guys. We're going to leave a big chunk of this conversation with you, because we really want to make it a dialogue. But I thought just to open this, I would sort of share. I want you guys to share with us a little bit of the setting 40 years ago. What was the sort of the political and the personal reasons as to how this collaboration came together, and what were some of the core values that brought you together? So if you guys could speak a little bit to that.
That's a great place to start, actually. There's another New Day member. As far as the era. We all grew up in the late 60s. A few things to picture in your minds. Okay, so when I went to high school, we had to wear skirts. We wore stockings with garter belts. We put our hair up in huge curlers and slept on them at night. Okay. The ERA, we hadn't heard of the ERA, Equal Rights Amendment. Equal pay for equal work, never heard of that. 59 cents to the dollar is what women earned. It's only 79 cents now, so how far have we really come? The Title IX, you know what Title IX is, right? Didn't exist at all. Any kind of birth control for an unmarried woman, especially unless maybe your dad was a doctor or whatever, and you couldn't get it. And abortion was illegal. So there were a lot of illegal abortions going on. At that time, including I had one. Many women did. So you couldn't even get a credit card in your own name if you were married. I mean, things were really very different in many ways. So, of course, then comes along the women's movement and the women's liberation movement. We did not call it the feminist movement at that point. We called it the women's liberation movement. And just a few things about that. One of the things we all began to notice as we met in small groups, which we called consciousness-raising groups, was that all of the images that you would see of women, whether they be Hollywood films, television, radio, print, New York Times, et cetera, all the images of women were all created by men, just exclusively, and mostly all white men. So we realized, well, how are our stories going to get out? How are our real lives going to get told if we don't somehow pick up those tools and do it ourselves? So that was kind of a motivation, for a lot of us. And along with that, some of the core values of New Day are really core values of the women's liberation movement, which would be, let's fight hierarchy. That is what has kept us down. Let's say we're all equal. We all have an important voice. And we all need to listen to each other carefully, as we did in our CR groups. So democracy, very, very important. And also the idea of there are plenty of people out there who need to know this message, not just people who read the New Yorker or the New York Times, et cetera, but just people everywhere. So reaching new audiences, right? Whether or not they were going to be profitable, whether or not, we were all about reaching new audiences. So those were two things that were extremely important. I'll see if anyone else wants to add to that. But those core values of democracy, lack of hierarchy, reaching audiences, listening to each other very carefully, making decisions together, those have not changed in 40 years.
And consensus.
Consensus decision making, yeah, okay. So those are some things.
Yes.
I hope that's helpful. Yeah.
Liane, you just need to speak into your mic, I think, because they are.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, no.
A couple of things just about the world of filmmaking. The films that we grew up on, the documentaries, again, all made by men, and most of them were about wars, vacation travel, famous men,
Right.
exotic tribes. Very, very few films about ordinary women, issues that we understood. And also the portrayal of the women's movement in the early days. First of all, the first thing I remember was we were ignored. We could not get on television. One of the very first things that got portrayed was street theater, was at the Miss America contest, where women were burning their bras. Well, they didn't burn them because they couldn't get a burn permit. But
Putting them in a trash
it was
can.
putting them in a trash can.
Girdles, bras,
And so that
stockings,
became, according to the media, that became emblematic of the women's movement. What was also emblematic was the way in which we were portrayed. And that was, if you were a women's liber, which we despised as a concept, the name, was that we were either too ugly to get a man, couldn't get married, or wouldn't for some reason. We certainly had to be lesbians, and we were talking to each other. And so
We were angry.
and we were angry.
Yes.
The women's movement had no sense of humor.
Right.
So what happened, these
Let's see
are,
the films,
in
they're
addition to the things that Julia talked about, these are reasons that we understood that we had to get our own word out about the women's movement. Of course, very few of us, except for Amalie, had ever been to film school or touched a camera or even knew how to do it. So a lot of it was self-empowerment. And I think self-empowerment is a very important part of the women's movement, always has been and still is. So I'll stop there.
And you told us a great story yesterday afternoon about how you got access to a camera. Can you just share that, quickly?
Yeah, I was teaching in, sorry. I was teaching, I always talk so loud, I keep forgetting.
Well, there's a camera.
I was teaching in a low-income town, and I was trying to motivate the students, and it was very, very difficult to get them motivated because I was assigned the discipline class, otherwise known as juvenile delinquents, in those days. And they said to me they wanted to make a movie, and of course in those days no one had access to film. Certainly poor kids, they didn't have Super 8. Very few people had 16 millimeter. And the kids said, well, we really want to learn how to do that, and can't you teach us? So I discovered that the football team had a triple turret Bell & Howell camera, the kind that they used in World War II, the leftover cameras.
The wind-ups.
The wind-ups, the wind-ups. And you turned the turret to get close up. There were no zooms in those days. Well, I don't know if there were. I certainly, the first camera I ever touched. And so after football season, we borrowed the football team's camera. I took the camera and the kids to a local film lab, had them teach us how to load it and how to focus. And that's how I started. And again, I didn't, like Julia and Jim probably, we didn't consider, Amalie, well, maybe you.
We didn't
We
consider
didn't consider
ourselves
ourselves filmmakers.
Yeah.
We thought of ourselves as
Activists.
political activists.
Yeah.
And film was we thought, the most effective and underused tool.
I think
Also-
it's a really good tactic because I would suggest there probably are high schools and colleges that have all this great AV equipment in the sports department, you know.
Yeah.
They have really good video cameras probably, and most of the time they're sitting idle. So there's a collaboration opportunity for you guys. Did you want to add anything to this short history? I know Amalie, you're because you went to RISD and then you sort of went to much more.
NYU
I
Film
went to
School.
NYU. I was in the
And you went to
graduate-
NY when it was called, what was it called then?
No, I was in the very first class at the Graduate Institute of Film and TV.
Film and TV. What's it called now? Is it still
It's called the Graduate Institute of Film and Television at NYU. Tisch, well, it's under the Tisch School of the Arts, right? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because
So
you teach
Alice
there.
teaches there, right?
Alice.
But
All right, so next question, and we really are going
Let me just say something about
Oh,
this.
sure.
Because just this is, first of all, if you didn't know, if you know that New Day started as a feminist, our first tagline were films for and about women. By and about women. So what was I doing in the middle of this? It's like,
That's a
I
good
was an
question.
accident of history because of the women's movement coming to Antioch College while we were there and us being in a new relationship and grappling with what that meant. I had to come to terms much earlier than most men with looking at the world in a different way. But having said that, the thing I want to talk about is I think another part of the real sense of what we were trying to do was to control the message, that this is all before there was an independent press, before there were alternative newspapers, before there were community radio stations. And we were part of that wave of people who changed the nature of media. In fact, when we started making films, it was very difficult to find a filmmaker who wasn't from a wealthy background, not a middle class background, not an upper middle class background, but a wealthy background. Those were the people and the main mass media that had control. And part of our sort of political sensibilities was an attempt to break that down and get directly with messages using the media to people.
And I'd like to add also that, in a sense, the women's movement and New Day came of age and were born at the same moment in isolation from each other and found each other simultaneously. Because the films, we started making our films out of our own impetus and understanding, but it wasn't out of a movement per se. We were born together. And once, well, in my case, I had my first film, the Mae Wilson film, which came into New Day afterwards. That I discovered afterwards through meeting Julia and Jim and Liane that there were a few other people with the same kinds of values, and then I saw that the women's movement was there, which validated the track that I was going down and the kinds of things I was interested in making films about that I thought were significant, and that it was like a feedback loop.
Yeah, so that's a good segue actually to this next question, which is it's the audiences, because you're really talking about audiences. There's by and for women. So how were you finding those audiences? How were they finding
actually,
you?
we should say we met each other and we decided
Oh,
to
yeah, yeah.
distribute the films together.
All
Which
right.
basically meant putting our brochures, our little brochures about each film, in one envelope and mailing them out to lists of people who were potentially our audience. So how do we get to our audience?
Yeah.
That's how we started, though.
We met because at a Flaherty film seminar in 1971, where the first
You guys know
international
this, the Robert Flaherty Film Seminar?
Yeah.
Anyway, we met
And
there.
because the first
Yeah.
International Women's Film Festival was born at that same seminar, and we were on the selection committee, and that's how we found Liane's film. So it was all a series of things all simultaneously happening and coming together. And
Great.
So one way we found our audience was, at least for me, Growing Up Female was sort of the first film in the co-op, and I traveled around with my one print on a bus and went to like Cleveland and then Pittsburgh and then Washington and then it sort of went all over with this one print. And people in the women's movement who I knew would set up a screening, like we'd have one in Cleveland and somebody would say, I know somebody in Pittsburgh. I mean, it was literally like that. Forget, no internet, no cell phones. We didn't really know each other, but we knew there was somebody. So then they would call ahead and set up another screening and another screening and another screening. I'd collect enough money to pay for my next Greyhound ticket. And everywhere I went, I'd actually ask everyone to write their name and address down. I think this was even before zip codes. And so our initial list, one of the initial lists came out of that whole journey, and I'm sure everybody here like wrote down names of people they thought might be interested in using the film. So literally we generated our own list. Then, long story, but I met some people who taught me, through Jonas Mikas actually, who I have to credit for like opening an important door for us, that you can actually buy lists.
Yeah.
You can actually buy lists of people. So we bought lists of people. There was no women's studies at that point. So we would buy lists of literature or sort of related. Sociology, yeah. And then we literally went to Amalie's loft once we became a co-op, and we literally like stuck the labels on, like 5,000.
University.
Yeah,
professors,
universities,
essentially.
yeah.
Pretty
Yeah.
much libraries.
Yeah.
And we stuck the labels on
Our
the
first
envelopes.
mailing was in January of '72. We had like 4x8 sheets of plywood on sawhorses, and we had 10,000 envelopes.
And we walked around
and
the
our-
table.
Well, Julia and I had actually done a mailing of Growing Up
Earlier,
Female
yeah.
before, which really led to New Day, because we actually chose the name, and I learned how to run an offset press. We can go back to that, and printed a brochure, and we had our friends at college stuff the envelopes. And because it was the women's movement, the orders flooded in, and it
Yeah.
was because of that response we actually started talking to Liane and Amalie, and we agreed to become a co-op because we could see there was an audience. So New Day from the very beginning was audience generated.
So a couple takeaways I'm going to suggest from that. First of all, getting names and addresses of people who are at your films is really important,
Yes.
and labor is really important.
Getting your friends to help.
y-
We called
nothing.
it-
It's like
getting
hard
your
work.
friends to
It's
help.
still hard work.
It is hard work, and we said, come on over to our house for a stuffing party, and everybody thought they were going to get food, like stuffing, and it actually was envelopes, but our friends
I
forgave
just
us.
wanted to add,
Yeah.
there's one other way that we got them, because I was distributing before I met them, and I just couldn't keep up with the demand. And I had never advertised, I had never done anything, but the way I got into it was through the women's movement, and I was in Bread and Roses, which was the very first collective. And what happened was the women in my group started raising money to help me make the films. But through them, the film got reviewed in mimeographed papers that were sent out to everyone, and also in publications like The Second Wave. So before I met Julia and Jim, I was flooded with requests for the film, mainly through publications of the women's movement and reviews and all that kind of stuff. So there were a bunch of different ways in which our films were getting known. And another was Prime, and that was librarians who eventually found us, and they became our champions.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, I think
we are
that
so grateful to
I
librarians.
think that it's interesting then, because I think now we think, oh well, you can silo yourself in your interest, and you can find alternative, from traditional news sources or any other information. But people have always been hungry for non-traditional avenues of information, and that's really key. I think that was key then. It might have been much more difficult, but it was still true that was a driving force, that people wanted alternative expressions about their own lives that was not handled by sort of,
Yeah.
the hierarchy.
Yeah, America is a highly organized country, and you have to find people whose mission matches yours,
Yeah.
like who are out to make the same kind of change or talk about the same kind of issues that you are, and it may be totally different than you ever expect. It might be little grassroots groups and wherever, or it might be university libraries, but you have to figure them all out, and that's still the job, is
Yeah.
who's my audience
Yeah.
in ways that I might not expect,
Yeah. I
and
mean,
how
there-
do I get to them?
There were always organizations, and that was the key, was finding that. And of course, today it's so simple with the internet. There are, micro-organizations for every little interest group.
It's a little harder, and now I think it's almost like too much information, because now everyone has that tactic, and
Yeah,
you have to
so-
sort of define yourself differently. But let's talk a little bit quickly about the structure, because I think you guys will say, New Day Distribution Company, you say, we're not a distribution company, we're a cooperative.
Yeah.
And what does that mean?
Go ahead.
Well, one thing I would say about what that means is the organization is truly run by the membership. I mean, people who come into New Day don't simply join because they're great filmmakers who have made passionate, important films. They come in because that is true, and they have a passion to get their film out to their audience. And so when people come into New Day, they get training, they go into one of our areas of work, and they lead, and they wind up running this organization. Not running it like there's a staff that's doing the work and they say,
No.
yeah, that's a good idea,
We do
but
the
literally
work.
doing all the work of a distribution cooperative, which means that New Day is not for everyone. But for people who have that passion to reach their audience, it's like enables that, and it changes people's lives. I'd love to hear later from other people who are in the
Well,
audience.
the key is that, and this was true from the very beginning, is that especially Julia and Jim when they made their first film, which is making the film about an issue is important, but the other half of the job of being a filmmaker is to find your audience and get the film out so your message can be heard, and perhaps you can accelerate social change. I think one of the really important things, which is how New Day has survived, is that we started with films by and about women, but as things changed into the 80s and the 90s, we've become basically a progressive social issue media group. And the idea is to be able to help accelerate social change, because no one person, no one group can change the world, which is what we all believe passionately still. But if you know what your message is, what you're trying to get out there, you can seed the landscape with the ideas, and when those ideas have reached enough people whose consciousness is raised by them, then that brings social change about, because all of us individually make social change one person at a time. It's when there's enough of a mass of individuals who then share those new ideas and believe in them that the social change exists, because we begin living it individually.
And let's talk a little bit about just the self-interest on the financial side, because I'm interested. You guys have over 100 filmmakers now. You have over 250 titles.
Around there,
It's
yeah.
somewhere around there.
Yeah.
So that sounds like a huge operation. How much staff do you have?
None.
One. I mean, we have
One
No.
part-time, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
two part-time.
And our-
Yeah, let me just say how that works, because people are often confused about that. The point's been made that we share the work, just like we all shared the idea of putting the labels on back 40 years ago. We still more or less do that. So every member who joins, and they're member owners, we're known as member owners of the co-op, gets assigned after their first year, where they're sort of a newbie and they get a mentor and they get help. After that, they get a job. Like somebody might help design a new catalog, which would be a big job. It's called a task, right? Somebody else might maintain the mailing list. Somebody else might maintain the relationship with the office. Somebody else might be in charge of recruiting new members. Everybody who's an active member.
Or especially
Has
We in
now
fact
with
have
the
teams,
internet.
like we'll have
Yeah,
the
right.
digital team, which is like
Right.
7 or 8 people at this point.
For
And they're
dealing
very
with the
smart
digital.
and interested in this stuff. So that's one of the ways we can kind of keep abreast of new technology, is because people who that's their brain, right, wouldn't be me, for instance. It would be Amalie, though, if she were a new member now. I mean, people who are interested in like graphic design, they're going to work on that aspect. People who are interested in new technology and are driven by that, they're going to lead the co-op in that way. So we've got like 100 brains who can figure out what they want to do. It works amazingly well.
And the center of our democratic form is the people doing the work do a lot of the decision making. The group as a whole kind of approves general direction and stuff, but we don't micromanage. And you don't get a voice in New Day by being a smart person or speaking well in a meeting. You get a voice in New Day by having a passion and coming up with something that needs to change, and then volunteering to do it. And every major change in New Day and development, from right now, we were the first company to have like streaming as part of our company. That's because we had 5 members who were desperate to get involved in that. And at first it was a pilot project, that was their
They
job
led the
for a
way.
year to
They convinced
develop
the
a streaming
dollars.
site.
And I think it's important to mention that the way that the whole organization works is there's an annual meeting every year where the whole group, where everybody gets together for 4 days in a kind of retreat and works on everything. And then
It's a love fest.
And then there's a
Lots of
mid-season meeting, and since the advent of email and the internet, then there is a mechanism on a daily basis for the group to be in contact with each other and to make group decisions.
Well, there's a steering committee, and the members of the steering committee head each of these teams of whether it's like promotion or whether it's digital or whatever.
All right, so
I
that's the
think-
socialist side.
yeah,
Let's
could-
that's the socialist side. Let's talk about the capitalist side.
Yeah, well, could I
I want to hear about the money.
Yeah, well, I want to interject one other thing. It's the way the organization, when we began, it was the 4 of us, then up to, I think, about, by the time we were 30 members, the consensus, 100% agreement method of deciding everything began to break down once you had more than like 30 people. And that's when we got to the point of developing the idea of a steering committee and breaking down. And then coming to consensus, not everybody agreed, but the people that were in the minority agreed that if the majority this, then okay, we could go along with that. All right, go on.
I want to hear about the money.
Well, I just want
No, come on, let's talk about the money. How much money do, because I got to tell you again, yeah, let's talk about the
I
money.
want to talk about money. But I also want to talk about one thing that filmmakers in New Day do not do, and that is we don't ship our own stuff ourselves anymore. We do have, I mean, just in terms of how the co-op works, we have what's called a fulfillment house. And so all our orders go to this one shipping office, and they have a dedicated person who works exclusively on handling New Day films.
You could do this too if you wanted.
Yeah, so you can do this,
Yeah.
yeah.
But they do that
But-
for like 100 other distributors.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So in terms of money, a little tiny bit of history, when distributors come to a filmmaker, and I'm sure those of you who are filmmakers have had this experience, you usually offered a percentage of whatever money comes in for your films. And
Either gross or net, you know,
and
depending
the
on the
best
deal.
you
Right.
might get might be, I think, about 25%, maybe of gross, usually.
When we started,
of-
it was 30%,
of-
but now it's like 20.
But it's net, but it's often net, which is not necessarily
Very
a good
mysterious
deal.
term.
Now, with New Day, we realized, and also they weren't acting in our interest. They were going after the films that brought in the most money. We distribute the films that we think are important and that we feel there's, you know, a need for and all that. In New Day, when the money comes in, the fulfillment house takes its shipping charges and handling charges, and that's it. New Day, as a collective, as a whole, we put out a catalog, we have a bunch of different expenses that we have to pay. But after those expenses
And there's a share, you should talk.
Oh, yes, we also have a share ladder based on how much money your film makes.
People pay more if they earn more.
If they earn more. But they never have to pay more than a certain amount.
Right.
Because otherwise, the high-grossing films would be penalized.
Well, let's give me say
So now the film-
what's a home, like no theatrical rights consumer,
again?
like
How much-
$25 if I'm going to buy your DVD for $25.
Well, most of the distribution we do is the educational market.
Okay, good.
And one thing is that we encourage, in fact, we early on, we force our members not to make distribution
So
deals
$250
for the home rights. So many of the members are like doing home distribution themselves and earning quite a bit of money from that because they
That's an important
control their
point.
own rights. That's controlling your own rights is one of the most important things of it.
It still
But
is.
the films
Yeah.
still sell for $150 to $300 each
So
to
let's say they sell for
universities and
$200.
stuff.
What slice? Just to give us an idea of how those financials work out.
What will the filmmaker get?
Yeah.
Oh, probably 60 or 70% of that.
Yeah, that's great.
But that's not even the most important part. The most important part is that other distributors, they put you in a catalog with 1,000 films, and some film hits big and they make about 80% of their money off 2 or 3 films, and the other film don't get promoted. Every person in New Day promotes their films,
Right.
and so the amount of money coming in on each film is exponentially higher than the average amount of
It's
a
important,
film in a
yeah.
catalog. So that it's like, in New Day, most people cannot make their living anymore. When we first started, me and Julia earned our living for 15 years doing
Actually,
the
20
distribution.
years. We did not have another job for 20 years.
But
that was in the 16
but
millimeter
in this day and age,
Right.
most people, most people earn real money through the distribution.
Right.
I look at one thing we get every month, a list of the activity on all the films in the group and
We
stuff.
all get that.
And there's
Yes.
just dozens and dozens, there's 20, 30, 40 films that are grossing between $10,000 and $30,000 a year, of which the filmmakers are holding a chunk of that.
Wow, that's great.
So it's real money.
Let's turn this conversation into more of a dialogue. So let's
Yeah.
hear from you guys. Do you have questions? You've gotten really good background, I think, now, and we know this success and some of the things that are driving it is both self-interest in getting the story out, but also the financial model is brilliant. So, some questions? Yes.
I had a question. I'm not in the filming or anything. My wife is in the dance. But my question was, I heard you saying that most of the issues or the films that are produced are mostly socially related issues. Are they also more, and you mentioned that most of your distribution through educational systems.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Like, schools and colleges and universities. So have you looked at, or is there an opportunity to do educational films that are not necessarily related to social issues strictly, but can help the social issues that in an indirect way?
Sure, well, yes.
Cross-cultural social issues.
Yeah. We definitely have cross-cultural films, and social issues is pretty broadly defined.
Excuse me?
We define social issues as you're speaking.
Okay, good. And the second question is that do you have, if you're not experienced in doing this thing, but just creating you have a concept, you want to create something, does your organization have help available to that individual?
We don't fund films.
No,
if
not
that's-
funding. I'm not a funding part. Help from, creating, like, if you have an idea that can help.
In other words,
cause.
is your model transparent on your website? In other words, if somebody wanted to duplicate the cooperative model that you guys have, is that pretty much transparent? Can I go to your website and figure out like how it works?
Something else.
I think
That's what he was asking.
No,
He was
he's
asking how new members who come in learn how to do the distribution, or were you asking?
Doing filmmaking.
Let me be very specific. Okay? She has thought about, using her dance. She's a professional Indian classical dancer. Dance skills to create movies or documentaries about how dance came about, how this thing, that thing, different countries' dances. Do you have help of, are there people available who can help?
No, we don't teach filmmaking.
Okay.
We're a group of people who've already made films who then come and join us for the distribution of their films. So that how you get the skills and learn and manage to make your first film is something you need to do outside. That's not New Day. New Day is this next stage after you've managed to make this film and find a way then to find your audiences.
However,
Right.
once you're in New Day and get to meet people, I would say half our films have another New Day member who's helped them edit,
That's my
helped them
question.
do something on their next film, not on making the film that brings them in. But once you're in, everyone cooperates. And I just want to say one thing about the culture of New Day. And in lots of cultures, I think this was alluded to earlier in terms of, a strong leader. The people who seem to be very, very highly respected in New Day are the workers, are the people who volunteer to do the hard jobs and or have expertise in something. And so that makes it a very interesting cooperative in that the culture is one of support, of generosity in sharing. When you think about filmmakers, you don't always think about sharing.
And we have no secrets. We have no secrets from set. By the way, depending on where you particularly live, I don't know where. If there's a New Day member, in Durham. I don't know if we have anybody in Durham, but
Joanne.
Raleigh.
Joanne is in.
So we have most of our people are like very sharing kind of people, because that's who's attracted to something like this. So I'm all the time getting young filmmakers coming to me to say like, oh, what book should I read, or how do I get started, or can I pitch you my idea? And most of us will say, sure, come on over for lunch or something. So if there's anybody nearby, we can talk about that afterwards.
Actually, 25 years ago, Julia and Amalie collaborated together on a guide called Doing It Yourself, which was for other people to duplicate our model and to do that work.
Did you trademark that name? Do it yourself.
We should have.
Do it yourself.
All right, so other questions?
But Rob, could I just want to add something to what was just said, which is simply that one of the most important things from the beginning of New Day was the understanding that you have power if everyone has the same information and shares it with each other. I think the model had been before, there are not enough slices of the pie, so I have to keep mine to myself and not do it. And we've discovered that the power is in everyone sharing and having that information, because the more people have it, the more they get accomplished, and the more pie there is for everybody.
It's really interesting. One of the things that we're doing, Working Films is a not-for-profit organization that basically works with filmmakers to get their films out, strategize, get their films out to non-traditional film audiences. And we've been doing, in the last couple of years, typically we worked with one film, did a 3-year campaign, would move to the next film. We were doing some trainings and workshops. That's pretty much what we were doing. The last couple of years, we're actually bundling films together around a particular theme. We just did one in DC called Real Aging that was funded by the MacArthur Foundation. It was a collection of films open to the field. Anyone could apply. We took 11 films into that co-op. There were 2 websites. They were basically video websites. And the idea then is that it's not about competition. It's about collaboration.
Right.
And I think with pressure on resources and human and financial and everything else, we're finding this model is really working. And when we go to work, go talk to a nonprofit organization or an NGO or even a funder and say, these films are on your issue that you care about. You may not care about film. If we can go with a cohort of films that are getting released over the next 2 years, they see that as a real positive because it's a single message. It reinforces it. One film doesn't change the world. We're all in it to change the world, but one film won't. And that is really very much speaks to the kind of, I think, that core value you guys
And
have.
actually, New Day is somewhat organized that way. We have what we call subgroups and around different issue areas, and those filmmakers work together sort of as part of the co-op, but sort of with their own energy to do exactly the same type of thing that you're doing at Working Films.
Like that. So
Yeah.
take a question.
Yes, here we have a question in the front.
Along the lines of this gentleman, like if you wanted a documentary made, even if you're not a member, why not approach the membership? You know, because it's like it's a group of people that are, you know, passionate about making films, so why not? You know?
Yeah, I think they're probably always looking, in varying degrees, in my experience, filmmakers are always looking for good stories.
Yeah.
I mean, we went to dinner with some filmmakers, last night, and some friends of mine who live in Durham, and there was a great story told by my friends who are not filmmakers. Hey, Liz. And it seemed like there was a connection there. You know, I think filmmakers get pitched stories all the time, but this, I think sometimes that works. So
There's a lot of documentaries waiting to happen.
there are indeed, and sometimes they're hard to
Find
find.
the funders.
Yes.
I was wondering, now, you mentioned that you're a nonprofit, Working Films is a nonprofit. Is there a specific legal kind, I'm a lawyer, is there a specific legal kind of structure that, are you all a nonprofit? 'Cause it's
We're
not
actually a
for-profit.
profit corporation,
Right.
as New Day, although New Day doesn't really earn anything because, you know, we just take in enough money from the members to do the work, and it's sort of like a break-even deal. But each individual member is organized in a different way, and many, many of the members of New Day are actually working under nonprofits, their own nonprofits, or under other people's
So do you
nonprofit
guys file
shares.
taxes?
Yes.
And how do you file?
As individuals.
Individually.
But New Day does not file
Well,
as a
let-
corporation?
Let me jump in.
New Day
Here's our
files as a
lawyer.
corporation,
One of our
yes.
problems is that our structure is so unusual that it gives lawyers fits. And so when our trademark lawyer, we have to renew our trademark every 10 years, and you try to explain to lawyers how the structure of your organization works, and they can, well, can we talk to the chairman of the board? It's like, so it is problematic.
And we were audited.
And we were audited. And here's
fine.
yeah.
So is there a whole bevy of paperwork?
Well, let me just talk about that, because I'm sort of
not of great interest. Everybody.
no.
I'm sorry.
No, but let's talk about the paperwork, because the other thing we want to
I
just
do wanna-
underscore is this new collaboration with the Duke Archives.
Yeah.
Can we explain a little bit just about how that's going to work
That's a
and
good-
your
yes.
interest and where all this history is going?
Yeah.
Yeah, so earlier this year, the Archive of Documentary Arts at the David M. Rubenstein Library acquired not only the founding films, so the films that were screened last night, but all of the founding films of the New Day founders, as well as the organizational records and papers. So we will, over the next year and a half, slowly be acquiring all of that documentation from each of the founders.
So the next time they have an audit, they're going to send their auditor to you.
And make it available for research. That's correct.
That's great. We have a question here.
Are you going to expand that to other New Day films over time, or is this a one-time thing?
Well, that's a conversation I think we're going to have in the next year.
And that got a little round of applause. That deserves a round of applause. Congratulations. Thank you. It's great news. Yes.
I want to come back to your question, because I don't know that I necessarily got an answer to it, because I'm a curator for a film festival here in Durham. It's an African-American film festival. And I know distribution always comes up as a major issue in the African-American community. So I do want to know, is there any kind of thing that New Day does to kind of train people in this whole distribution model? Because
Yes.
there's nothing that I've seen in the African-American community, and if so, what is that?
Well, everybody who joins New Day, well, first of all, there's our website and there's the book that we wrote a long time ago, but it's a very good book. And anyone who joins New Day as a member owner gets a buddy, actually gets two buddies, right? And so they are, for the whole first year, they are kind of walked through all the processes. Because of course, it's complicated. You don't know how to distribute a film if it's your first film. So your buddy is assigned usually in a subject area that's sort of similar, or somebody who lives in a similar city, and you really rely on your buddy to help you get through it.
I
So
think that-
yes, but we don't give classes in distribution.
But I think that and I haven't looked
Yeah,
at
it's okay.
the website is brilliant. I looked at the website because it's a great model about how to get the streaming. They've always when its DVDs came up, the DVDs were there. So it's a great distribution site, regardless of whether it's a for-profit or non-profit or socialist or capitalist. Doesn't matter. It's a great distribution site, which is one of the reasons it's working. But to answer your question, and I haven't looked at this part of your website, what I would suggest, because you're so much about non-competition and open source, is that have on your website a little bit of a transparency about how it actually works.
We do.
That people could take from that. That basically a learning would go and say, okay, you know what, I can't be necessarily a member of New Day because, you know, it's a limited co-op, but I can figure there's a lot I can learn from them.
Some of that information is on our website. If you go to, well, anyway.
But
Yeah,
not
we'll
a-
have another
but not-
conversation
But not
about
a
that.
lot, and it's something that's been discussed in New Day for years, and I would not be surprised to see us move more in that direction of sharing sort of distribution information. We've done that in terms of having salons in like San Francisco, which is a huge documentary community, in New York, and sort of in getting certain panels at different festivals and stuff, but we've never had an organized approach. Since we did, 30 years ago we had an organized approach, but in the last 10, 15 years, we have not had an organized approach to share the distribution model, and I think we should, and I suspect we will.
Yeah, it's great. Yes.
Is there a certain length of film that you find is more attractive to you as a company than not? For example, the feature versus the short. And I
Yes.
ask specifically because
Shorts.
I've got 5 shorts about social issues in Eastern North Carolina. I'm trying to build into a 1 hour with a narrator and some music. But at what point should I come to you folks beforehand and show you the shorts, or wait till I finish the
That's a good question. It's like, how do you join New Day?
On our website, there's an entire page that explains exactly the process for coming into New Day.
But you're asking a different question.
The question about length is, since many of our users are educational, and if you've ever been a teacher, you look at what the length of a class is. And so our experience has been that for the most part, it's something that will fit within a class period, 30 minutes, 45 minutes. However, we do have feature films that people buy.
Oh, yeah.
Feature length.
But many members who join with the feature-length film eventually cut like a
down.
45, 50-minute version for classroom use.
But how do people join, too? Because let's answer that question. How do you, if I'm a filmmaker in the audience and I'm thinking, wow, this is a perfect model for me, I want to get my film out. These guys, I love their sort of socialist capitalist model. How do you join?
Well, we have, I think still, we have 2 periods before our steering committee meeting in January and before our annual meeting. People can apply. There's an application online. How do I join New Day? And it explains exactly how you come in. And what you do is you submit your film. The film is then either streamed now to
A bunch of people
members.
look at it who are
Right.
in the co-op now.
Right.
We have an acquisitions department of members who talk to people who have questions about applying and about joining. We make clear to those people that it's not just because you made a film. If you do this, it's going to have to become an important part of your life, which
Yes.
pushes away considerable numbers of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a whole process, and it starts on the website, honestly.
Yeah.
But not everyone who applies gets in.
No.
No,
Not
the
everyone
first-
applies
the
gets
first-
in.
The first stage is the film being seen by as many members as can see it, and then if the film, if the majority of those members think this is a perfect fit for New Day, this would be a great film, then it's set up an interview with the filmmaker to talk about the whole process and find out if the filmmaker has the values that would mesh with the group and the willingness to come in and work cooperatively that would make them, that would fit with being a member of New Day. And then after that, if the filmmaker passes the test, as it were, then there's a contract, an initial contract, and then the person is accepted. But then there's a 6-month, there's a small initiation fee at the beginning. There's a 6-month trial period, and they have to attend the first meeting that's coming up within the period when they're accepted, either the mid-year steering committee meeting or the annual meeting in June.
Well, so this has been great, actually. One last question for you. Just a note, too. I got an email from someone I didn't know who saw that I was moderating this and thought I was in some role of authority, I guess. And they said, and it was just because we do a little bit of work in the UK, and somebody sent me an email from London and said, "Are you going to Skype this panel?" And I thought, oh, well, New Day is always keeping up right on that technology, but we're not Skyping this, are we? No.
Robert, I have one comment.
Oh, sure.
If you don't mind. One of the things that, just looking back over 40 years and looking at the evolution of New Day, how do you grow from 4 people who are sort of running the show to 100 people in which we're not running the show. And what's happened in New Day is over the 40 years, I think Jim said, we've had probably four different sort of cycles of new members who are now on the steering committee, who are now making a lot of the decisions. And so that's really fascinating in terms of looking back at how does a cooperative survive and continue to grow. When you look at other artist cooperatives or any cooperatives where you have four type A personalities, many cooperatives do not survive the founders. And for me, it's such a heartening feeling to look at the co-op and look back at 40 years and say that our success is not in the fact that we founded it, but in the fact that it can carry on and that we have other people who can pick up the values.
And let me just say that none of the four of us are leaders of New Day right now. None of the four of us are. The people who are leading the organization right now mostly have been members from somewhere between 5 and 10 years in the organization. It takes about 5 years to have enough experience and knowledge to really head up one of these committees and be in the steering committee. But we try to have one sort of older hand to keep institutional memory on the steering committee at a time. Most of the leadership are people 5, 6, 7 years in the organization.
And so, all of you guys, do you want to leave us with last thoughts?
I have a last thought for any filmmakers in the audience, which is, I think two things. One is if you're only guided sort of in your distribution side by where can I get the most money, your film is not going to be as effective as it could be than if you think in terms of who can this film really make a difference for. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing is, if you go with the distributor, if your film is going to really get out there, you're going to do a crap load of work already. There's virtually no distributor who will take the tender loving care that you would take. Like, you're going to have to find those audiences. You're going to have to get the mailing list. You're going to have to make suggestions. You're going to have to travel on your own anyway. So unless you're really you've made the kind of film you're willing to cut it off, leave it behind, go on to the next project, never think about it again or whatever, you're going to do a ton of work anyway. So being in a co-op only means you have a lot of other people pulling for you in your film too, right? Other people are working for your film while you are working on their film in a way. So that's the great thing about working cooperatively.
Also, you can control the message of what's the advertising for your film. When you give your film to a distributor, you often do not have any say in how they're going to describe your film or whether or not they're even going to include your name as the filmmaker.
Wow.
And
that's pretty key.
If you look
Amalie,
at catalogs, a lot of times you're not anyway. So
Amalie,
our films are connected with the filmmaker.
Do you have a last thought you want to share with us?
No. No, I haven't made a film in 20 years, I have to confess. Not because I don't want to, but because of the difficulties of fundraising and a lot of other things. And I live in Europe. And something I think we didn't say is that filmmakers in New Day have to live in North America and be able to be here to do the work because our distribution model is in North America, although many of the New Day films have international distribution. But the most important thing is the connection between the filmmaker and the message that you're trying to get out, and the way in which you can work with your colleagues and peers to generate a wide message of progressive social change that this country really, really is desperately in need of alternative voices. Even with PBS, the mass media still is very much against a lot of what we're trying to do, and I think that's why New Day is also important. We're still a loud voice out there.
An important voice, and even the films we saw last night were very relevant and evocative.
And many of these films that are 40 years old still are relevant.
Okay, hold it.
Yeah, and I've got a last word, which is a good place to end it, Full Frame, about creativity and doing this kind of work. When we started out, people would say, "You're artists. Why do you want to get connected with this business thing? Why do you want to spend your time finding audiences? You should go out being creative." I think for most of us, having this intimate connection with our audiences in the process of making film over years and years and years has made us really the filmmakers we are, and really strong filmmakers. And work in New Day is some of the most celebrated and awarded documentary work in the country. And that's not like an accident. That is partly because of the process of what we do.
That's great. You guys, thank you very much.
Okay.